Welcome to Integral Christian Network Podcast, where we explore ways of evolving towards a more loving, inclusive, and embodied mystical Christianity.
Welcome, everyone, to the ICN podcast. I'm Luke here with David today, and welcome to our final episode of season four. Season four has been just a wonderful journey, lots of beautiful conversations around WeCreating, and we're we're at the end of it now. I've got a baby arriving in soon from this recording, very soon. And David's got some stuff coming up, so we're here to cap off this season and go on hiatus for a little bit. But of course, the process and engagement will continue in the ICN community. But glad here to be talking with you today, David. Hello.
Yes, it's good to be here.
So in addition to yeah, this being kind of the close of season four in a kind of interesting way, this is also the opening of a new season, a new stage in ICN, as we just recently celebrated our 7 year mark and are opening up into this we creating stage of ICN. And so these things that we've been talking about and moving with are the beginning of ways of being and ways of practicing and developing organizationally, personally, communally. So there's a lot of really foundational stuff in here that's certainly going to be continued to be unpacked and practiced with and engaged with in lots of different contexts. And yeah, because that's this is like a big part of our calling in ICN now is to move in this we creating way more and more. Anything you want to say on that, David?
Yeah, this has been a very unique season. You know, um, we've covered a lot of ground throughout our seasons, and we've tried um, to explore different subjects, different people. Um, different ways of exploring what it means to be human and what it is to practice the spirituality we feel we've been called to. But I'm wondering if for this season, if there's a way that you could bookend for us, why we approach this season in a particular way. And since you were really at the forefront of developing a lot of the material we've been going through, is there anything that you want to communicate?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned the organizational change that we're going through and coming from a founding stage, this vision of we creating that's come forth, that's emerged, that has been cultivated is yeah, I wanted to go about it in these conversations with you and Beth, and like be to get instead of kind of like a survey of, out and interviewing people and different ideas, and that's wonderful too. I love those kind of podcasts, and we've done that in the past, of course, too,
Mhm.
with different conversations. And it just felt like this season was a time for us to explore and set down and open up some of the fundamental realities of this way that we're being called more and more into so that we could really like chew on it and bring it forth and share it and open up to it, because there are some new things about it. We're making up new words, we creating, combining words where we're exploring different components of what that looks like and how we inhabit that, because I think the heart of it is this movement of um, really taking in and taking on our incarnated calling to be Christ in the world. And how do we really do that in this day and age, with the society and culture, with the way things are evolving, and with how we live the mystical, evolving, integral Christian life in showing up in the fullness of who we are. That has to be all of us. That can't be, a few spiritual leaders. It can't be a couple of people talking on a podcast, or it can't be the priests, the pastors, the ministers. It's like this is the call to all of us. It's going to take all of us to be a part of bringing about the evolutions that need to happen desperately for ourselves, for one another, for the world. And so this call to a divine collaboration, a spiritual engagement in the various ways that each one of us inhabit that personally and communally, right? Our divine vocation, which is both who we truly are and what we be or do in the world, not just as like a job or a special project, but how we show up every day with that divine presence. And of course, we explored that in a previous podcast. And so, right, also then the source from which we are able to do that, that divine vitality, that energy, that way of flow that comes into inspiration and brings these things forth. I mean, we've talked about all sorts of different dynamics of that. So it just is again really crucial to be with that deep inhabiting and that calling that I believe is crucial, not just for ICN, but for all of us who are spiritual, not even just Christians. I guess not even spiritual, right? All humans to not be consumers, to not be, you know, fall into some of the systemic traps or the different things that society, how that, paints us, but like really own who we are and our divine calling and step into that. So that kind of leads us into today's topic a little bit,
Do it.
which is calling our precious personhood or um, our divine essence as it expresses in each one of us singularly. And so we're going to kind of wade into this. We're going to dance, we're going to explore, we're going to consider different facets or elements of it. And really, the crux, I think, of why I wanted to talk about this is because there's so much in spirituality out there and in Christianity and contemplation and lots of different ways that I feel and see people wrestling this, um, with the self. We'll just call it the self, right? Um, and this is not just a religious issue, certainly. There's a wonderful work by Charles Taylor called Sources of the Self, The Making of the Modern Identity, that chronicles all these different ways that our understanding of self has evolved philosophically over the last few hundred years and Western society. And, how we come to identify who we are is caught up in all sorts of different considerations and sources and ways that we understand ourself. And it's almost, I think, become for many, I don't want to certainly speak for all, but for many people, the self has almost become a prison. There's like a confines of this individuality that we can so often feel trapped in. And it's like, oh, it's more than the self. We need the we, right? We need the universal. We need to expand. And that's totally true. So, like, we're trying to escape the confines of self as a limited individualism that is so pervasive in our culture and in our loneliness and our struggles of identity. It's like it just can crumble, or when our defenses, our supports that are lacking, deeper sources, there's so much to it that just becomes an area of so much conflict. And so, in some sense, in some spiritual perspectives, right, we move with and beyond the self into um, ways of the all, the universe, the drop, and the ocean, right? And it's like the self dissolves, and we are in that formless totality of everything. And there's, some truth to that, some value, some goodness in that spirituality, certainly. And also, I think there's sometimes what I want to be with today is the exploration of not just our moving from the finite to the infinite, but our conscious movement of the infinite into the finite, of the eternal into the temporal, and in particular in our personal being. We explore that in the we a lot communally, but today I even really want to hone into like how, and I guess if that is our calling and our movement of this personhood, of this preciousness, of this, in older language we might call it the soul, that is something that is a deeper source and place and way that we can really rest in and be and inhabit that is more than our understanding of self. And there's lots of different ways, true self, false self, essential self, language. We'll get into language of it, but that's I think the heart of the movement here that I want to just, explore and converse with you today, David.
So another light subject that we're going to be diving into.
That's what we do in this podcast. We just kind of
Where do
pick
we go
some
from
stuff.
here? Yeah, everybody
Yeah.
who seems to experience and deepen in their process of discovering this mystery finds language to help make sense to the people around them and to their time. And um, we can see how some languages are helpful and some language is not, or it's outdated. And I guess to just tag on a little bit to like a little addendum to what you were sharing earlier of why we've been going through what we've been going through in this particular season is that all of those different subjects are various ways to explore what it is that we're looking to kind of not to put a capstone on here, but at least for the season,
Hmm.
give a I don't want to say a benediction, but kind of like an exclamation mark to everything that we've been exploring. Um,
Mm.
so,
Yeah, that's good.
for instance, this is not a bone to pick, but I personally over the years have struggled with the language of, for instance, true self, false self.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
not saying it's bad or wrong, but and when I've been at retreats and have heard that language get used, sometimes I've heard it used as a binary.
Yeah.
And then the question comes up, how do I know I'm in the true self? Or how do I know when I'm in the false self? Or is it an all or nothing kind of, system? I don't necessarily want to pick on the true self, false self thing, but uh, the way that I try to contextualize it when the subject comes up is you could almost say the contracted self and the expansive self. Or I don't like using up down language because
Hmm.
honestly, the ego, which is involved in the process
Yeah.
almost always, could be the true self in lower disguise or higher disguise, but still operating from an egoic point of view. But the thing that I believe that has helped me to work through that in my own life so that I'm not speaking about others is to love the whole thing. Just love the whole flipping thing, which is a process. That's certainly not a one and done event. There's still times where I drive myself crazy, but or others can drive me crazy, or I can drive them crazy. But but to fall in love with the process, to fall in love with my false self, and to use maybe more religious language, to love myself as God loves me, whoever God is and whatever I understand God to be, and whoever I am and whatever I understand that to
Hmm.
be.
Yeah.
Yeah, that there's this ongoing, unfolding, constant um, process and participation that is never not informed by love. And
Yeah.
what's at stake is whether or not we're experiencing that's love that's infusing everything. Is there something to go off there?
Absolutely. I think that's a great starting point because as we explore the different language and they're all, in some sense, constructs of understanding and ways of trying to, like you're saying, articulate these spiritual realities and mystical experiences and ways of understanding that all have limitations and different meanings to different people. But like, so rooting it in that loving field, like, is so crucial because however we understand this, whatever language we use, getting it right isn't the goal, It's like, in some sense, right? We're here to hopefully in some way intensify or deepen into the loving field of how we live that, how we inhabit that, how we be that, how we are that. So that's just beautiful and wonderful um, to put it in that way because it's so easy to fall into I think it's part of the puritanical lineage, although there's certainly Catholic elements or other, non-Christian. I mean, there's it's a human condition, I think, to war with the self in a way, to want to be better and also to have that self-critical. I mean, there's good sources to that and bad sources, right? Of we all want um, to grow or to deepen or even spatial language. And so I with you, up and down, binary, true, false, limited, even spatial, expand, contract it. It's like intensify. How do we language it? Because even that isn't quite right. I feel like we're trying to express something that is I feel in some way of the eternal realm. And so to put it in temporal terms, we're always going to struggle with that. So just acknowledging that we can play with the language that's helpful or not. Some of them I feel like are less helpful now. Like even the word ego is just so loaded with, I think, a lot of different ways of, warring with or transcending or. But again, as it's helpful, we can move with it. The best language, at least for me, that I've come to at the moment is what I say is the essential self or our divine essence. Because for me, what that's trying to get at is like a core fundamental, again, underneath spatial language isn't the best, but like something of who we truly are. That's language I use a lot, right? Who we truly are. Like, so we're stripping away layers of falsity or construction, and yet at the same time, we are made up of those layers too. That is part of who we truly are. It's not just all chaff, and then there's this kind of little diamond in the middle. It's like, no, we are who we are, which has both, I think, an essential component that is eternal and timeless and always from our soul in a core sense, and there is development of evolution and becoming and integrating that makes us who we are becoming. That's part of who we truly are also. So I feel like it's kind of the both and of those, right? Where everything that comes after isn't just constructs and made up identities that we need to shed off or it's like no, there is a deeper truth underneath that, and also there are things that get on put on top that are false, that are less than who we truly are, and the process of discernment and recognizing and owning those things is part of life. And there are things that we grow into and become and take on, I think, especially relationally and communally, because we're not just singular soul individuals, right? We are made up of this vast interconnected web, the language of interbeing. So even our sense of ourself, right, is not a monad. We're a part of this. And so there has to be reality to that. There has to be goodness in that substance of who we are because we're not totally isolated from that. And so, yeah.
I'll jump in here too. Maybe I, I think it's so important to celebrate the wrestling match, to
Mm.
celebrate the boy, you're right. We're finite. There is a part of us that's finite creatures, and our brains are finite, and our experience can be infinite. But that is really hard to give language to. But I suppose there's a part of me that wants to say we should be wrestling through these things. And I don't mean that in a negative way. The apostle Paul used very strong language because he wasn't as developed as Jesus, and he was helping people to come into a deeper experience of what they called Christ and what we're calling like integration, this, and which is never ending. He says this powerful phrase: the spirit wages war against the flesh, and the flesh wages war against the spirit. Well, in the ego or the flesh was an ancient term for the mortal self. The mortal self is waging war against the infinite self, and the infinite self is waging war against us. And there's that's a I would dare say, to be so bold, that that's very Jewish. because in Judaism, wrestling with God is something that's built into their sacred texts. It's built into, the way that how do we live in a world that's so filled with God, and God, we know God is loving, and yet there's suffering, there's death, there's things that we can't explain, there's injustices and all of these things. Well, for
Yeah.
crying out loud, this is a very complicated existence that we live in.
Yeah. Yeah.
So many
Yeah.
levels, so much trauma, so much pain, so much confusion and absurdity, and so on and so on, that there's bound to be a little bit of having to wrestle through those things. But the invitation, of course, is to I'm allergic to saying this because it gets overused and overhyped, but to have a non-dual view of things. But I really want to take a few moments to qualify that, because that, in my opinion, is still just the same language as everything else. It's just dressed in sort of higher falutin language. I once had a very
Yeah.
wonderful person. I'll finish with this cute anecdote. So I had done something at a place where I was with some folks, and I did something that caused another person say, that wasn't very non-dual of you. And I said, how non-dual of you to notice? You know, and we were being cheeky, and it was cute. There
Yeah.
was there was no tension to it, but it was like, well, you know, non-dual is everything. It's literally the best word that we can come up with, this to say there's no category. There's no, like, if you put a category on it, you've just limited it. So again, language is going to be limiting. The best
Mhm.
that we can do is just to keep pointing to the infinite in and through the finite,
Yeah.
and all of us are included in that. So
Yeah. 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 Exactly. And that is like, yeah, we're wading into spiritual philosophical territory that is endless, right? And it's great, it's fun, I love it too, and it's like,
sure.
I think there's more to unpack here and be with, and also again rooting it in the love, and also I want to bring it back to
Yeah.
the context of what we're talking about here and why this matters. I think in the context of this season is, as we're talking about we creating to into our divine vocation, that is our calling, our summoning, and our naming of how we voice the divine in the world, how we are um, brought into our vocare, our that's what that means: summoning, calling, naming of what it is we are meant to be and do in this life, in this world, right? So again, we hold that holistically. We talked about that before, and that calls forth a preciousness of the uniqueness of that, um, in how we bring it from our personalized self, from our precious personhood. Because there's lots of ways that we can do that work that's born out of guilt or obligation or shame or idealism, or and that's part of the wrestling. It's never going to be 100% pure. When I was younger, right, I started a new monastic intentional community and went to live in the inner city. And I remember, reading this book that had this just idealism of like, yeah, we go to the abandoned places of the empire and we live there. And this is how the early church lived. And they shared everything in common. And and it's so inspiring. And like, yes, of course, why, and dove into this and lived there for a number of years. And it was hella hard. I mean, it was, and so much of that, I mean, the biggest crux of it for me was like, it's born out of my spiritual ego. Like it wasn't coming from my, what I'd call divine essence or my true calling, my actual vocari. It was like, well, this is what it should look like, right? It was an idealism. It was a, utopia in a mini sense, in some ways, right? So that again, there's so many ways that, so that the heart of this, again, for me, in the context of divine vocation, is to help us really essentialize, to hone in, to recognize like the deeper identities, the deeper callings, even the deeper namings of who we truly are, so that our divine vocation can be born out of this place of divine essence, this deepest identity, and how we feel and recognize and understand that takes some of that navigation and disentangling, right? And it also takes a willingness, I guess, or a belief to say that we do have a precious personhood, that we do have this essential self at the core of us that is being called forth into this. So whether that's naming, whether that's deepening identifications, again, we can still be with that in some specific ways, but that's the in the older language you're talking, the language of soul was sort of reflective of that for a long time, and then that I feel like got entangled and overburdened with lots of things. So we'll continue to play with the language, but I think that's the underneath core and crux of the why and the movement of it, right? Again, not to see it as a fixed thing, like we are verbs as much as we are nouns, right? In our becoming, in our engagement, in our calling, and in our expressing. That is so much of this divine life, and I think our mystical expression of our Christophany, our Christ manifesting in life in the world.
And isn't it a beautiful thing for you to look back on that self that was discovering himself and
Hmm.
realize, he was being loved, was love, uh, and you're you gave something a shot. You were young. Uh,
Hmm.
I mean, I hope all have stories like this where our minds have an idealism and we chase it and then realize it's the hero's journey, I guess. You get there and you get disillusioned and you realize it was something else to begin with. But that's part of the discernment that you've been talking about. Those are beautiful. That's what makes the story beautiful. If we just came and
Yeah,
plop
yeah,
everything was
yeah,
love, it wouldn't, you know,
yeah,
uh, yeah,
yeah, yeah.
not be an adventure, that's for sure.
That's right. Yeah, we
I,
love the process. And recognize that's also part of what got us to where we are. It's like that was essential maybe, right, to bringing forth.
yeah,
I mean, that's what led me into the dark night, that was able to strip away the spiritual ego. And yeah, it'd be great if I never had that spiritual ego to be, but that's not reality. That's not incarnation.
that's
That's
the way
not,
it works.
and
Yeah.
we're all born into that in different ways, and how that expresses in our lives. So we're not like, yeah, certainly not going to war with those lesser parts of ourselves or those past versions of ourselves. Um, and I think that's an entanglement that people can certainly get caught up in, all too easily, unfortunately. And probably in part because a lot of religion and even spirituality can so easily kind of weaponize that shame of our lesser forms, even calling it lesser, right? Our previous, it's all part of the
Younger.
unfolding of evolution. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm. There's I've shared this before on the podcast, and it's still in fleshing itself. It's still where it's not just a cognitive experience, but I think it might behoove us to at least bring it up at this point, where about a year ago, I was reading in John's gospel, which I find to be the most transrational of all the gospels. It kind of shows where you are, the reader is, and it is so transrational that I just keep discovering new things. But when I was in a particular section, I heard a voice, the divine voice, say within me, around me, uh, "Did you know that I love becoming you?" And I had said to the voice inside, I thought it was my job to become. I thought it was this vessel's job to become you, this consciousness, whatever. And the voice did not answer that question. The voice said, "Nothing is wasted." And I've been working with that for some time now. And then at a point, this not in as deep a meditation as that was, but in a point recently, uh, the nothing is wasted part recalibrated the way that I've been viewing things. I know cognitively, I don't want to reduce it, but I know in my heart and I've known at the cellular level, and I've known cognitively that all of this, seen and unseen, is infinite presence. We all live and move and have our being in God. But the nothing is wasted part did this kind of subtle but explosive revelation that it means that not only um, is everything God and taking place within God, God loves the ego. God loves everyone's ego. The ego is taking place within God. Um, and this is not to abscond some kind of conversation, which could get really abstract, and I don't want to do this. But that in a sense, everything is becoming Christ, or everything is becoming, and by Christ, what I mean is the infinite and the finite becoming one, but differentiated. So not one like pizza dough, where it's all just kind of a blob, but with the distinction and those kinds of things. Um, and that we are all basically becoming. We are all humans throughout human history and right now are becoming. Some maybe not as awakened to that and suffer. That doesn't make them any less God.
Mhm.
They just may not be aware of that. That's what's at stake, is the awareness and the marriage of of sense and soul, I guess. The marriage of Christ and the church, the marriage, the living church, not the organized church, although that's taking place within God too. So who knows what's in the future of that. But that we human beings and all creatures, do you get what I'm going for here? We're in the realm of mystery, so it's a little difficult to give language, but in a sense, there is the awakening process to that, and there is no end to God. And I strongly believe there is no end in the soul's journey towards God. Um, that's a belief. I'm not stating that with definitive reality, but thus
Yeah,
far, this particular human journey, I do strongly trust that the way that God individuates God's self and puts God through the human journey, that all humans are in the process of not only divinization at some point or another, whether in this life or in another, but that we are all in that process. And so everything deserves to be loved.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we love, there's love in the becoming, there's love in the being, right? So it's, yeah, both the process and the state of being at any given point, right? It's like love the 2-year-old throwing a tantrum in us, right? Love the,
Yeah.
love the sage that's still in the future, just yeah, there's the process of it, there's the root of it, and it's all love. It's all, you know, again, yeah, not, and that's again so crucial to reiterate because so much of this, so much spiritual impetus can come from that, guilt or that obligation or that I need to be more or I need to, even this sort of state of attainment. Uh, there's just so much in that that can be um, so toxic to ourselves, to one another, to reality, and it's actually counterproductive to the evolution of things, right? Because that does include failure, that does include law. I mean, there's so yes, and we in the rhythms we talk about sometimes with language of the rhythm of evolution, our being, our becoming, and beckoning. So like to
Mm-hmm.
listen for, to tune into that beckoning. What is that voice of God that is saying nothing is wasted, that is saying you are my beloved son in whom I am well pleased, that is saying what to us, and how is the voice of God, the voice of spirit calling us by our true names, because that is how love moves as well, right? Like I love my children and where they're at, and a huge part of the core of that love is the desire to see them get to live and be who they truly are, right? To not take on these personas or masks or roles. And they're going to do that. That's life, but like
Part of the
that,
process.
that's the crux, the shining through and the affirmation. So it's, we're not going to rail on the I don't know, goth phase or what, who knows what the kids will go through, but like, okay, great. We move through these. So, but yeah, if we can be open to listening for that beckoning and recognize that it's not, even that is not the what makes our value dependent, right? Like mentioned divinization, like our sense of becoming God. Again, that's sort of the finite into the infinite. And we're also welcoming the fact that union already is, and it's not the end point. It's actually the place from which we can begin and come forth from in any and every moment. Again, that's in the eternal. So we're, but that's part of, I think, our essential being, our essential self is that rootedness in the wholeness of God that then arises into form, into life, into us, into me,
Here's
into you.
all right,
Yeah.
dude. You're gonna get me going. Look, it's in our it's in our texts. It, through the Logos, through Sophia in the early manuscripts and John's Gospel. So Sophia or Logos, whichever you choose, they both can apply. Through Logos, all things have been made. But when Sophia gives birth to you again from above, then the given nature takes on a, um, a divine human nature. So there's the givenness of the fact that we are all created from stardust. We're all created from infinite, an infinite attribute of God that manifested everything through love uh, and risk, and then through that rebirthing process, being born from above, to use that language. But there's a lot of going in that text I'm not going to get into, but then there's the more consciously growing into that awareness. I just want to add onto something that you said that was so beautiful about your kids, and I feel that way about my kids too. I want them to go further than I did. That's my hope and my prayer for them is take this further than I was able to take it. Um, I they're way more grounded and more self-possessed and realized than I was at their age. And I don't know. There's that old kind of, I think it's from India. The person who plants a tree knowing another will sit in their shade. When it's sitting in its shade, that's the person who's begun to understand the meaning of life. So I want to add that on. Jesus will through the mouth of Jesus in John's gospel said, "You will do even greater things." I still have to figure. I'm still living myself into that particular fascinating statement, but it it just makes me most of the time fall in love with things. Our political
Mm.
process definitely puts me in a challenging a state of challenge, but let's not go there today. But yeah, I mean that is too. I mean it's all participating, and what's at stake is our capacity to see it, to you used the word believe earlier, but that becoming, that being, becoming, and beckoning, and sometimes, yeah, believing. I gotta believe that this is going to keep going the way that it's that that the God beyond us is very much involved in that
Yeah.
process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's in that depth of source of wholeness, I think, is where we can find the capacity to move in such a way in such a broken and fractured world where there's such destruction and chaos and atrocities and like no sense of hope for utopia is gonna like pull us through that, you know. So it's not about the future, and it's also not about the past, like finding the way it was and the best time, or bring, or even in ourselves, what was the part of me that, you know, it's like we're still growing. And so there is that movement through time, and there's that eternal source wholeness from which we draw upon. And like that's the only way that, to me at least, I feel like the only way that it will, the source deep enough and full enough to be able to meet all of that with love, to be able to meet the lesser parts of ourselves, to be able to hope for that for who we see around us, to be able to, yeah, be in the grief and the loss and the pain that's around us and not disassociate or, you know, idealize, or again, all those movements that are so pervasive spiritually and politically and socially, and you know, that come out of, I think, these lesser identities, these forms of constricted self, again, whatever language we want to use, come out of our traumas.
Mhm.
So much of that. And if we're meeting that with a, I'll just say, less than divine self-expression alone, because it's the human and the divine, right? If we're meeting it with just that, I don't think it's going to be enough, right? Like maybe for a while, maybe, you know, I just, that the pain will come there. And so it's like, how do we really root into that source and find the places of our divine self-expression, of our essential being, again, in communion, not just community and communion, that then vitalizes us, inspires us to bring forth our our voice, our our true voice, in the ways that are rooted in our truest being. And that the beauty of that feels, that's what's inspiring to me, that's the creativity piece, right? The we creating, it's like, okay, we are able then to bring forth a divine self-expression that is so much more authentic, so much more authentic to, again, who we truly are, authentic to the world, authentic to whoever it is that we're singing to. Right? It has that genuineness, that, I don't want to use the word purity, but like a tone, right? That's um that brings forth beauty and goodness, and hopefully catalyzes further inspiration and becoming and release of all that which is less and destructive, and um, you know, taps into disabusing evil a little bit, but like, yeah, it's all that to me just feels like what my heart is, to root into that, help us root into that, for me to live that way, um, because it's just that much more full and substantiated.
You were using the word purity uh, with caution and then finding another word. For years, um, I have replaced that word with clarity. For me,
Hmm.
purity, like if I want pure water, I want clear water. You know, I already know by the way that my body receives it, um, the water is doing its job. If it's contaminated, it'll put in toxins and that sort of thing. But you know, I was thinking of that passage, that, or that saying that Jesus had, where traditionally it's been interpreted as blessed are the pure in heart, they will see God. And I started to, you know, I know in the Aramaic it can have more like a marching orders, like walk on, those of you who are mourning now, you will be comforted. Uh, Blessed are the short of breath, the kingdom of heaven is yours. Uh, so you could say, march on, you who are have clarity of an inner life. You'll see God. You'll see God in yourself, others, situations, you know, the world. You'll perceive reality
Yeah.
differently.
Yeah.
And I think in the Greek, the word blessed would be more like how fortunate
Mm.
is the
Yeah.
one
Yeah.
who has clarity of heart. Uh,
Yeah. So it's not an if then. It's a
yeah,
cause
it's
effect.
not a
Like, yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
exactly, and it's not a passive consolation like a patting on the head.
Yeah. Yeah.
Blessed are
Yeah.
you, you know,
Yeah.
like which
Yeah.
is how it was kind of passed on to me, much
Mm.
like the if then kind of
Mm.
proposal that if I'm really moral, you know,
Yeah.
if I'm
Yeah.
really moral, according to my group's
Yeah.
understanding of moral, then God will reward me with some kind of
Yeah.
insight. But that's not the
Yeah.
way I understand that now. And yeah, when there's a clarity that the impurities, or you might say, like if I were wearing my glasses right now, if I got specks on them, it's not there's not clarity. It's there's dirt,
Yeah.
clearly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
clearing that off, it's the same thing with that we're referring to here. That the more clarified, you could use the word impurities, but not from a moralistic point of view, from like a healing point of view, or
Hmm.
um,
Yeah. I mean,
yeah,
again, it's exactly what
blind
we were
spots.
talking about with language before, where it's like, you know, I know I am. I think we grew up in this purity culture and this way of faith being expressed that was just like, ugh. So there's baggage with that word for us, just like we were talking about words of understanding self and identity,
Right.
different associations of baggage. But if we're getting a felt sense of what we're actually trying to point toward, that's again the crux of it, the point of it. And it brings me to an interesting thing I wanted to ask you, and then I was like, well, if I ask him, he's going to ask me, and am I ready to share that? So I'll ask you, but then I'll answer it myself, because there is something I've talked about before, our true names, right? Like there's a beautiful poem by Thich Nhat Hanh, like please call me by my true names, and that explores interbeing and such. And part of our vocare is our naming, our being named, right? We have the baptism of Jesus I mentioned before, right? You are my beloved son. Um, what are the ways? Have you received any true names or any callings of your soul that have been given a name? I from a young age I was always drawn and fascinated to that verse in Revelation that says, I'll give you a white stone upon which I'll write a new name that only you can see. And it always was like this mystical, kind of mysterious, like, oh, what's that about? And my name Luke means light bringer and light bearer, and I have a lot of resonance with that I've always appreciated and felt. And also in this essential self, in our divine essence, I think there's times when we might receive a true name, we might receive a naming of that. And I had one. So you can think about yours if you have one. If not, that's okay. One that I received a couple years ago was actually given to me by Paul on his deathbed. It's one of the last things he said to me. We had a time of meditation together, and um, after that, he he called me a pure soul. And you know, I was recording it. I was like taking notes on my phone. I was like wanting to, not lose it. And I received it then, but then it wasn't until over a year later, and I was doing a kind of meditation, a process of this opening up to divine essence. Like, what is it that spirit's speaking? Like, who to call forth some element, some aspect of this true being of who I truly am. I like using the word elemental because it's like these core elements, right? And that came up again, pure soul. Pure soul, we're playing with the language purity, and I have all that baggage, but then here's this expression, pure soul, that just was like, oh, like something, it's like, yeah, that's a true name for me. Like there's something in that is of who I most essentially am. And there's something timeless about that too. Like I've had that, I think, my whole life, maybe more, maybe beyond that. And it has shadow, it has goodness, right? There's ways that that's hurt me in life, there's ways that that's blessed me. So again, it's not about a pure and perfect thing, um, but it's about a way of being that reflects something of my essence. And that, I think, has been so helpful because it helps me recognize as I live into my vocation in the many ways that that looks both in my job and otherwise, how I show up in every moment in each day. Um, I hold that name, I hold that reality, and I feel it when I am that way. It's not like, oh, I need to work to become this. It's like, oh yeah, there's me again. There's that way of being that I'm inhabiting in how I'm meeting this person or how I'm, and at times, oh, there's where that's getting covered over. That's, I'm not tapped into that. I'm operating out of something less than that, a lesser story of who I really am. And that calls me back, right? It's not a shame. It's not you know, a thing I have to crucify or, it's like, okay, it's a it's a letting go, it's a release, but it's returning to that. So, what about you?
It's a beautiful thing. I haven't heard you share that before. I'm just really deeply moved by that. Um, well, David means beloved, and I think I'll go there for now. Um, and before I read Henry Nouwen, just to qualify this, there's always someone who's going to catch you on something and think you're plagiarizing. But um, not that our group is hostile. Don't take that the wrong way. But
Our
uh,
audience is
yeah,
just picking apart our
they
podcast
yeah,
for
they
that.
just can't wait to start typing in you plagiarist. I know our group isn't that way, but the word broken down means beloved, and that's been a hard thing for me.
Mhm.
Just over, I love my parents and my family of origin, and some of that has come from healing and doing the work, but it was really hard for me to believe growing up that I was loved or could be loved. And so really stepping into the meaning of the way that my earth name works has been a lifelong journey to be loved. And so that's kind of where sorry about that. That's kind of where I've been coming from is yeah,
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
capacity to receive what is when it's given,
Hmm.
and not push it off or avoid it. But it also ties into what I shared earlier in that
Yeah, exactly.
story,
I was just
right?
gonna say that. I mean, that's what you were like leading with at is like, this is love. It's like that's an example of you voicing, living your divine vocation, right? Of
Right.
that from that name. It's like, well, this is all love. Let's not forget. This is all. It's like, yes, it's
Yeah.
beautiful. It's
Yeah.
like
And what is the student, the primary student from that story call himself?
from which story?
I'm sorry, I've been quoting John throughout our
Oh,
conversation. The
yeah, yeah,
primary
yeah,
story
yeah,
in John's gospel is the one whom Jesus loved.
yeah. John the Beloved.
And yeah, and that's how he saw himself.
Yeah,
He wasn't negating himself, but he discovered his identity through his capacity to receive love.
yeah. Hmm.
And so that's been part of my part of my journey. But I think if we're in season 4 and we may be going on a little of a hiatus, I think a beautiful thing to do, and you started this, so don't feel the pressure that you have to end this, but I'm gonna say that you know I I love you and I care for you, and you are someone who is a bringer of light and a pure soul, and you've been someone that um, there is a clarity about you. There is um, you're a phenomenal networker. And I hesitate and use that word because that's a business term. And I don't like using business terms for spiritual realities or spiritual human realities, but you really do know how to bring people together. And it's such a marvelous gift to see how you have helped bring that about in a very unique way. Um, I I don't want to use word like I'm proud, but I want to affirm who you are and who you are becoming and who you have become up until this point. Um, I am just so thankful to be someone who has been in relationship with you for years now. When you said 7 years, it just boggles my mind how quickly
Mm,
time can go by. That's
mm,
that's a really that's a really wonderful amount of time in our adult lives,
mm,
and that Paul connects us, and a lot of different things connect us. But to see how we started and to see what we've come to, it's just been one of the great gifts of my life. And
mm.
so I want to say thank you. I want to end this season on a point of gratitude
Yeah.
that shows how our interbeing, can function out in a practical way. And um,
Yeah. Mm.
so,
Beautiful. Thank you, David. I so
yeah,
appreciate that and receive that and love you too. And just, yeah, that belovedness, you are loved. And I am so grateful for you. And like that, what you're mirroring, what you're witnessing, like we are, our true names, they come from spirit, they come from God, they come from our soul, they come from one another. Paul, graced me with that. And there's a way that we continue to live and be and do that in community. Like we're that's how I want to close. Before I go there, another name that's come to me in this process of opening, welcoming, receiving these elements of my divine essence is the name Graceful Gatherer.
mm,
So you were just naming that as well, this reflection of, yeah, this is, and there's an archetypal element of that gatherer, right? So like, we can move with archetypes, although it's also deeper than that. And how we name these things is a beautiful, deep affirmation of that, like essential part of who we are and the goodness of that, right? Again, the goodness, that fundamental belovedness and way of incarnation of Christ being that suffuses and sources our precious personhood, right? So again, back to that's where that's coming from and how we name that and hold that. And it's not one thing, it's not like an identification, a typing like the, and this is you and it's fixed. It evolves over time.
yep.
And this is where I want to end. The beauty that we're finding is that in community is where that really comes alive. It's not just affirmed, it's also revealed. It's we revealed in the holding and naming together where those things get clarified, they get honed, they get recognized for one another, but also in an interbeing sense. So, like, there's something of me now that holds a greater belovedness because of how you are in that. And so, again, we're not separate monads, we have that inner being. And so, these essential aspects, these elements, these qualities live and move in community and among us. So maybe something of mine is also now more fully in you now. And maybe even someone listening that I've never met. There's something of this when we get to this level. I don't want to, call it quantum entanglement because that can get over. But there is a level of like, again, our not, this is not self-contained. This is so much beyond and deeper than the confines of self. Like, and this lives and moves and flows in community. And what a gift. Like, what a gift. Like, even in that, when we reveal that with and through one another, that's revelation. And it's not just a knowing revelation, it's a knowing, it's a remembering, it's an inhabiting, and that looks and expresses itself communally. And so in ICN, as we close this podcast, knowing as we're moving in, that's a big part of this we creating stage that we're telling these stories of ourselves, our origin stories, our divine origin, our eternal divine origin stories. And we're going to be coming into and growing more and more in seeking those expressions, those namings, those aspects of our divine essence in community. So there's lots of different ways that that's going to be happening, that we're exploring that we're moving with that. So come join us, jump into the Mystical Garden, our online space, connect with the We Space, connect in, and open up to that work that we're exploring in community, work and play, and whatever we call it, spiritual practice. I don't love the language. A new one I'm kind of playing with is actually
Mm,
a Tehard word. It's amorization. Amorization. So we're just
mm.
Amor, right? Amor, the love, right? We're becoming love. So just back to your name, that is what this is all about. Our amorization, our love becoming and being, and I guess beckoning to into our precious personhood, our divine essence, our deepest callings, and how we live that divine vocation out in the world, personally and communally.
Yes.